Hi, everybody. Today we're going to talk about westward expansion and, more importantly, some of the ideas that drove it. Probably the most important idea associated with westward expansion in American history is a concept known as manifest destiny. And that is going to be the focus of today's video. So let's start with the definition of manifest destiny. Simply put, manifest destiny is the belief that the United States was destined by God to expand across North America. It is at its heart a justification for U.S. territorial expansion as well as American settlement across the continent. So, where did the idea of manifest destiny come from? It is important to understand that manifest destiny was never an official doctrine or policy of the United States. That phrase, manifest destiny, was never uttered by members of our government or foreign ministers negotiating on behalf of America. Rather, it was actually coined by a journalist named John O'Sullivan, who in 1845 used it to describe the growing expansionist sentiment in the United States. But it is important to note that John O'Sullivan was not inventing a new idea. The idea of manifest destiny had been present in the United States for a long time. O'Sullivan was simply giving it a name. So the roots of manifest destiny can be traced back to earlier in the century. Americans had long had their sights set on the West. For example, Thomas Jefferson, our first truly expansionist president, did a great deal to fan the flames of expansion with the Louisiana Purchase and the Lewis and Clark expedition. Additionally, the expansion of the American population during the Market Revolution from 5 million people in 1800 to 23 million in 1850 meant that there was an increased desire for new lands and the economic opportunities that came with them. This fueled the desire for territorial expansion, which hit its high point during the presidency of James K. Polk. In fact, some historians have referred to Polk as the manifest destiny president because of how closely associated his administration was with the acquisition of Western lands. So obviously, when we think about manifest destiny, we should first and foremost connect it to Western expansion. However, there are other ideas embedded in manifest destiny as well. For example, we need to recognize that manifest destiny was an idea rooted in nationalism. The idea that God wants Americans to expand across North America assumes that Americans are a chosen people. Therefore, manifest destiny was based on the concept of American exceptionalism, which is a belief that the United States has a unique history that makes it special and therefore destined for greatness. This idea that America was somehow special had been building since the end of the War of 1812. Following the War of 1812, Americans felt a growing pride in their country, which was represented in the era of good feelings and the beginnings of a national identity. In some ways, the Monroe Doctrine was a preview of manifest destiny because it was a nationalistic policy that claimed America as the protectors of the Western Hemisphere. Manifest destiny went a step further by claiming that America was destined to take over large parts of the Western Hemisphere. Now, connected to this concept of nationalism and the idea of American exceptionalism was an underlying racist ideology. Since manifest destiny assumes that God wants America to expand across the North American continent, it means that by default, other groups who already did occupy these lands were inferior. Manifest destiny would be used to justify America's war with Mexico, its seizure of Mexican lands, as well as its confiscation of territory from Native Americans. Americans would continually justify their actions in the West by claiming that they were spreading civilization. So keep this concept in mind as we talk about the closing of the Western frontier later in the course, because manifest destiny will come back to be a recurring theme in American history, as well as this concept of the superiority of American civilization. Now, another important idea to understand is that manifest destiny was controversial. One of the great myths surrounding manifest destiny is that it was supported by the entire country, when in reality, there were many Americans who opposed it. Manifest destiny drew most of its support from Democrats, especially Southern Democrats, who viewed territorial expansion as a way of expanding the institution of slavery. Since most of the territory being added in the 1840s was below the Missouri Compromise line, the power of the South would increase as new territories such as Texas would be admitted as slave states. Many Northern Whigs, as well as abolitionists and anti-slavery forces, were typically opposed to Manifest Destiny. They were concerned about the expansion of slavery out west, and there was a number of people who saw events such as the Mexican-American War as immoral land grabs. Now, Southerners took Manifest Destiny even further than most Americans. Cotton depleted the soil of its nutrients, and the South needed to find new lands that were capable of sustaining King Cotton. For many Southerners, the territorial gains from the Mexican-American War did not go far enough. For these supporters of Southern Manifest Destiny, they would have preferred to conquer all of Mexico. Therefore, there were attempts by a few Southerners in the 1850s to expand into parts of Latin America. Perhaps the most desirable region was the island of Cuba. With its rich soil, tropical climate, and established sugar plantations, many expansionists in the South were eager to get their hands on it. In 1852, President Franklin Pierce dispatched a group of American ambassadors to purchase Cuba from Spain. Their negotiations resulted in the Ostend Manifesto, which was leaked to the U.S. press. This effectively shut down the negotiations as Northern congressmen worried about adding more slave territory to the United States. In some cases, individual Americans actually took it upon themselves to gain more land. William Walker, for example, led a group of Southerners in an invasion of Nicaragua in 1855. For a time, Walker and his Walker expedition was successful in creating a pro-slavery government within Latin America. However, Walker and his forces were eventually overthrown by other Latin American countries and executed. So ultimately, Manifest Destiny would have a huge impact on the United States prior to the Civil War. As territorial expansion became a major issue in the election of 1844, Manifest Destiny served as a rallying cry and justification for the increasingly aggressive actions that America would take in order to add lands such as California and Oregon. These events will be explored further in future lectures. But for now, know that the United States as a whole got caught up in a period of rapid expansion in the 1840s. The additions of the new territories would bring the issue of slavery to the forefront of American politics and accelerate the sectionalism between the North and the South. Thus, Manifest Destiny is not only the context for westward expansion during this time period, but the Civil War as well. Manifest Destiny would also not end with the conquering of the North American continent. The concept of Manifest Destiny will be revisited at the end of the 19th century as America began to look to build an empire overseas. As the United States begins to conquer places such as Hawaii and the Philippines, and it will return to some of the same arguments it used to justify the seizure of lands from Mexico. So make sure you understand the concept of Manifest Destiny. We will be revisiting it numerous times as we move further and further into American history. Take care.